Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're stepping right into, well, a real intellectual firestorm in the 17th century.
Absolutely. It was a time when the very foundations of how people understood cause, ideas that had been around since Aristotle, started to really crack.
Yeah, you see this moment where philosophers are grappling with a fundamental question: is the reason something exists, its purpose, as important as the mechanism that actually brought it into the world?
It was a huge shift. You had this rise of new scientific thinking, right? Very focused on observation, on mechanisms, and that put enormous pressure on the classical Aristotelian idea of four causes.
Well, especially those more complex, maybe harder to pin down causes.
Exactly. The formal cause, what something is, and the final cause, its purpose or end. There was this real push to kind of boil everything down to the efficient cause, the thing that does the work, the mover. Seems simpler, maybe more manageable.
So our focus today is Clemens Timpler. He's a really key systematic philosopher from the German Protestant tradition. And our mission really is to unpack his incredibly careful, detailed metaphysics.
Meticulous is the word.
Right, specifically looking at how he mounted this rigorous defense of those two teleological causes, form and end, against this powerful reductionist wave.
And Timpler wasn't working in a vacuum. He was deep in this complex philosophical landscape, directly engaging with and sometimes really battling the heavy hitters of Jesuit neo-scholasticism.
Figures like Suarez and Fonseca.
The very ones. Huge influences. Timpler had to sort of absorb their systematic approach, their rigor, but at the same time push back hard against some of their core conclusions.
And the relevance for you listening today. This isn't just some dusty historical debate, we promise.
Not at all.
It's really an exploration of concepts that are still fundamental. How do we even define reality? What counts as a cause? And what's the difference, and it's a profound one, between explaining how something is made versus explaining what it is and why it exists in the first place?
So let's dive into that intellectual battlefield he was on. Okay, so to really get what Timpler was trying to do defending these four causes, we need to understand the context. It's called Metaphysics.
Right, this German academic movement, Protestant professors, late 16th, early 17th century.
Exactly. And these thinkers, Timpler included, they felt that the philosophical curriculum they'd inherited, largely from earlier reformers like Melanchthon, just wasn't cutting it anymore. It wasn't systematic enough.
They needed something more rigorous, more organized.
Precisely. They wanted to reclaim metaphysics, not just as commenting on Aristotle, but as a proper structured discipline. And to do that, they looked at who was doing systematic philosophy really well.
Which led them, maybe surprisingly, to the Jesuits.
It did. I mean, figures like Suarez, Fonseca, Pereira, these Catholic scholars had developed these incredibly powerful, topically organized metaphysical systems. Timpler's own major work, the Metaphysicae Systema Methodicum from 1604, you can see the structural influence plain as day.
There's a certain irony there, isn't there? Protestants borrowing the methods of their chief theological rivals to build their own philosophical system.
That's a huge irony, and this is crucial, they weren't just mimicking them, they weren't copycats.
Yeah. They were actively intervening, jumping into ongoing debates within Jesuit circles.
Absolutely. And Timpler's biggest intervention, the one that really sets the stage for everything else, was redefining the very object of metaphysics itself. He wades right into this argument between Fonseca and Suarez about the words ens, real being, and aliquid, which just means something.
Sounds like a subtle point, but it has big consequences.
Massive consequences. Suarez, who was incredibly influential, generally argued that the proper object of metaphysics is ens, real being, things that exist or could exist outside the mind. Concrete stuff, basically.
Okay.
But Timpler picks up on an earlier point made by Fonseca and argues, no, ens and aliquid aren't strictly synonyms. Something is broader than just real being.
And how does denying that synonymy let him redefine the whole field?
Because it allows him to shift to focus. Instead of metaphysics being the study of ens, real being, Timpler says it's the doctrine of the intelligible.
The intelligible, so
yeah.
Anything the mind can grasp.
Exactly. This is what scholars call the noetic shift. Metaphysics, for Timpler, isn't primarily about what's physically out there right now. It's about what is thinkable, what possesses a coherent essence the mind can understand. This blows the doors wide open.
Because it means metaphysics can now deal with things that don't currently exist physically, like past things, future things, merely possible things.
Precisely. Things that are possible, things that have an essence, even if they aren't actualized right here, right now.
Okay, I think I see why this is so important for his later arguments about causes, especially the final cause, the goal.
You got it. Because the big problem for the final cause was always How can a future goal, which doesn't exist yet, cause something now? If metaphysics is only about a reliant, you're stuck.
But if metaphysics is about the intelligible,
Then an idea, an intention, a goal, as long as it's a coherent possibility, an intelligible concept with a real potential essence, it has a kind of reality. A mental reality, sure, but a reality grounded in possibility. This gives ontological footing to intentions.
it creates a secure space for possibilities, for blueprints, for goals, even before they're built or achieved. That groundwork seems absolutely essential for defending teleology.
It's the cornerstone. Without that shift to the intelligible, his defense of the final cause wouldn't get off the ground.
Okay, so Timpler has broadened metaphysics to include the intelligible. Now he has to tackle the definition of cause itself. And the sources show this was a real headache for 16th century scholastics.
Oh, definitely. They were kind of obsessed with finding a single catch-all definition for causa, for cause in general.
Yeah.
Aristotle, for all his brilliance, hadn't really provided one that satisfied everyone.
It makes sense, though. If you're going to talk about 4 kinds of cause, you probably need a good definition of what a cause is in the first place, right?
Exactly. But the existing attempts were problematic. Aristotle's suggestion that a cause is basically what answers a why question. Well, someone like Suarez pointed out the issues.
What was Suarez's problem with that?
His critique was sharp. He said, look, if you take that answering why idea too broadly, you end up confusing causes with any old principle or necessary condition. But if you take it too narrowly, it really only seems to fit the final cause, the reason why something is done.
So it doesn't properly capture the material cause, the stuff, or the efficient cause, the maker.
Right. It just didn't seem systematic enough to cover all 4 bases equally.
Yeah.
So Timpler, seeing all this back and forth, starts by clearing the ground. He points out 3 ways people were using the term cause improperly, basically highlighting the errors of his contemporaries.
Okay, what were these errors?
First error, thinking of cause as some kind of absolute property of a thing, pro ipso ante absoluto. Timpler insists, no, cause is fundamentally respective. It's a relational term.
Meaning something is only a cause in relation to its effect. Like parent only makes sense in relation to child.
Exactly like that. It's not an absolute quality a thing possesses on its own. It exists only in correlation with a causatum, a caused thing.
Okay, error 1. Cause is relational. What's the second?
The second error is blurring the lines between a true cause and a mere principle or necessary condition, what they sometimes called a sine qua non cause.
A condition without which something wouldn't happen, but isn't the actual cause.
Precisely. Think about, say, baking bread. You need oxygen in the room for the oven to work, right? Oxygen is a sine qua non. But nobody would say oxygen is the cause of the bread in the same way the baker or the heat is.
Right. Necessary, but not the active cause.
Timpler restricts true causality to attributes where there's an essential correlation between the cause and effect, usually involving some kind of active power in the cause and a corresponding passive potentiality in the effect. Like fire having the power to heat and water having the potentiality to be heated. There's an essential link there.
Got it. And the third error, this one seems like the big one for his project.
It is. The third error is the tendency already strong in his time to limit the word cause only to the efficient cause, the maker, the mover.
And this wasn't just coming from science. It had philosophical backing.
Oh, yes. You have figures like Justus Lipsius, who was huge back then, reviving ancient Stoicism. And the Stoic view was very materialistic, very deterministic. For them, really, only matter and the moving cause, the efficient cause, were true principles.
So if the whole world is just atoms bumping into each other, driven by efficient causes, then where does that leave form and end? They start to look like mere side effects, or maybe just ways we talk about patterns, but not real causes in themselves.
And Aristotle himself kind of opened the door for this, didn't he? By noting that sometimes the form, the end, and the mover seem to be the same thing, like when man generates man.
Exactly. That observation fueled the idea that maybe form and end weren't fundamentally distinct categories, that they could just be folded into or explained by the efficient cause.
So Timpler's whole system is pushing back directly against this reduction.
Directly. He needs a definition of cause that is broad enough to include the non-moving, non-active roles of form and end. He actually expresses some skepticism about finding a perfect general definition, but he lands on a version from the Coimbra commentators, which is:
Cause in general is rightly defined as a principle on which the cause thing causatum depends. Simple, but powerful.
The key word there is depends.
Absolutely. It focuses entirely on the asymmetric relationship, the dependence, which he grounds in those essential active-passive powers we mentioned. It firmly establishes cause as a respective attribute.
And significantly, he rejects Suárez's very popular definition here, the one about influx.
Yes, Suarez defined cause as a principle flowing being into something, influence per se, esse in aliud. He thought influx could cover all four, even matter and form flow being into the composite.
But Timpler didn't buy it. Why not? It sounds quite encompassing.
Because influx, especially in the 17th century context, just screamed action, production, movement. It felt biased towards the efficient cause, the one that literally makes something happen or flow. Timpler needed something more neutral.
Something that could equally describe the static relationship of form to the composite, or the intentional relationship of the end to the agent, without implying physical pushing or pulling.
Precisely. Dependence, did that work for him? It was ontologically neutral regarding how the dependence worked, whether through production or composition.
Okay, so Timpler's got his broad definition of cause based on dependence, and he situated metaphysics within the realm of the intelligible. Now he has to actually arrange the four traditional Aristotelian causes, efficient, material, formal, and final, within this system.
And defend them, right. Defend the idea that these four are sufficient, that you don't need alternatives popping up from atomism or hermetic traditions.
His big organizational move here, the sources emphasize, is really elevating the distinction between extrinsic causes and intrinsic causes.
Yeah, that division becomes absolutely central to his framework. It's not just a handy way to sort them, it's based on their fundamental mode of operation.
Extrinsic being the efficient and final causes, intrinsic being the material and formal causes.
Correct. And the difference is how they relate to the effect. Extrinsic causes, the maker and the goal remain outside the thing being made. They are primarily concerned with production, with the process of coming to be. The sculptor doesn't become part of the statue, nor does the purpose of the statue.
Whereas intrinsic causes, the matter, like the marble and the form, the shape and structure, they actually become the thing. They're about composition.
Exactly. They give being to the effect by contributing their own entity to it. They constitute the essence of the thing itself.
Now, the sources trace this distinction back, perhaps surprisingly, to Plato's Timaeus and its difference between ateida causes and synacia, auxiliary or joint causes. Why reach back to Plato when he's fundamentally defending an Aristotelian framework?
It's a strategic borrowing. That older Platonic distinction, especially as amplified by later Neoplatonists like Proclus, carried a certain hierarchy. They tended to view the mover, efficient, and the end, final, as the real causes of generation, while matter and form were seen as more like necessary conditions or components.
So Timpler is using this tradition to add nuance, to say, yes, all four are essential for the thing to come into being and exist, but they contribute in fundamentally different ways.
Precisely. He wants to clarify that the extrinsic causes bring about the essence, while the intrinsic causes compose the essence, both vital but different roles.
This leads straight into his perfection hierarchy, which I have to say feels really counterintuitive at first glance. He argues that the extrinsic causes, efficient and final, are actually more perfect than the intrinsic causes, matter and form.
It does seem odd, doesn't it? Especially from an Aristotelian perspective, where the form is often seen as the most crucial element, the very actuality of a substance.
Right. How can the builder in the blueprint be considered more perfect than the actual substance, the form and matter of the thing itself?
This is where that Neoplatonic influence really shows. Timpler argues that the mode of causality involved in production is inherently superior to the mode involved in composition, because the intrinsic causes, matter and form, are fundamentally incomplete on their own. They are mutually dependent. Matter needs form to have any definite structure or actuality. Form needs matter to be instantiated, to exist in the real world. They can't actualize themselves, they require each other.
Okay, so their mutual dependence makes them less perfect, in his view.
Yes. Whereas the extrinsic causes think of the efficient cause, the artisan, guided by the final cause, the plan. They exist and are actualized independently of the effect before the effect even comes into being. The artisan has their skill. The plan exists conceptually, regardless of whether the statue gets made. They possess their causal power autonomously.
So he's ranking independent dynamic production as inherently more perfect than interdependent static composition.
That's a significant leaning away from a purely Aristotelian view.
It is. It aligns him more with that Platonic, Neoplatonic idea that true causality, unqualified causality, is found in generation, in bringing something new into being. Fascinating. But even with this hierarchy ranking production higher, he still insists on the ultimate priority of the two teleological causes, the final and the formal, within their respective domains.
Absolutely. Despite ranking extrinsic over intrinsic imperfection, the final cause, the end or purpose, remains for him the first of all causes, primum omnium causarum.
Why does it retain that primary status?
Because it's the reason for the entire process. The end determines why the efficient cause acts, and it dictates what form the efficient cause should impose on the matter. The whole causal chain kicks off because of the goal. The why comes first, logically speaking.
All right, let's focus on the final cause. This was clearly the one most under attack, especially from the mechanistic worldview. The big conceptual hurdle, as you mentioned, is this feeling of backward causation.
Right. How can the goal, the finis, which lies in the future, cause the action happening right now? It seems to violate the normal flow of time.
The standard answer, even then, was that the goal exists now as an idea, as an intention in the mind of the agent.
True, but that just pushes the problem back. If the final cause only exists as a concept in someone's head, is it actually real? Is it just an ens rationis, a being of reason, a mere thought construct with no causal power? There was a strong scholastic principle. A cause must exist in act to cause anything.
And this is where Timpler's earlier move, redefining metaphysics around the intelligible, pays off massively.
It really does. He basically says, hold on, the requirement isn't necessarily for present physical extra mental existence. Mental existence is perfectly sufficient for a cause, provided that the thing existing mentally is a possibilium.
A possible being. Let's unpack that difference again between a possibilium and a mere ens rationis, because that's critical here.
Okay. An ens rationis is something purely conceptual, maybe even logically incoherent, like a married bachelor, or like sameness, considered purely in the abstract. It has no potential for real existence outside the mind defining it. A possibilium, however, is different.
It's something that could exist.
Yes. It has a real essence, even if it's not currently actualized. It has potential properties, powers, and specific conditions under which it could become actual. Think about the architect's blueprint for a house not yet built.
The house doesn't exist physically, but the blueprint represents a coherent, possible structure with real properties. It can shelter people, it requires certain materials, etc. It's not just a fantasy like a square circle.
Exactly. It's a genuine possibility grounded in a real essence. And Timpler supports this with his modal ontology, his theory of possibility and actuality. He lays out theorems stating things like, being applies to anything that can possibly exist, not just what currently does exist. And existence follows the mode of being. Something can have mental existence, future existence, past existence.
And crucially, these possibilities aren't just figments. They have real essences that the mind grasps.
Right. That real intelligible essence is what gives the final cause its reality and its causal footing, even when it only exists in mente, in the mind.
Okay, so he's dealt with the reality problem. But what about the other major challenge? The tendency to reduce the final cause to just another type of efficient cause. If the goal attracts the agent's will, makes them want to act, isn't it just pushing them from the inside like an impulse?
This is the other huge hurdle, and Timpler saw that the standard scholastic way of handling this was weak. They often used Aristotle's idea that the end moves the agent through metaphorical motion, like beauty attracting the soul.
But Timpler felt that still sounded too much like efficient causality, just maybe a less direct kind.
Exactly. Calling it metaphorical motion still frames it as a kind of motion, a kind of efficiency, even if an improper one. He needed a way to describe the final cause's action that was completely distinct from producing or effecting a change.
A mode of causality that doesn't involve pushing, pulling, or making something happen dynamically.
And he found it. He argues that the final cause does not cause by acting per modum effectionis in the manner of an efficient cause, by producing change. Instead, it causes per modum finitionis in the manner of an end, by defining or determining the action that needs to be done.
By defining or determining, okay, let's use an analogy. Building a birdhouse.
Okay.
The efficient cause is the person sawing the wood, hammering the nails, that's per modum effectionis, the action, the production.
Right.
The final cause is the plan, the mental image, or maybe the actual drawn blueprint of the birdhouse. That blueprint isn't hammering nails.
No, it's not.
But it determines where the nails go, what shape the wood needs to be cut, when the job is finished. It sets the boundaries and directs the efficient action. That's per modum finitionis.
Perfectly put. The final cause doesn't produce the change, it specifies the change. It determines the agent's powers by representing the specific essence, the possibilium, that the agent aims to realize. It guides the what and how of the action, not by pushing, but by defining the target. It's the causality of logic, of essence, of definition, not physical force.
A completely different category of explanation. But this reliance on definition and mental representation seems to imply intelligence is required, right?
It does. For Timpler, he's very clear that final causation ultimately presupposes mentality. An agent has to grasp the end or be directed by something that does.
So for things in nature that don't seem to have minds, plants growing towards the sun, rocks falling, how do they have final causes?
For Timpler and many scholastics, their directedness towards natural ends implies a higher intelligence guiding them. God essentially directs non-cognitive natural agents towards their appropriate ends by instilling those ends within their natures. All teleology for him ultimately points back to mind.
All right, so Timpler has mounted this really sophisticated defense of the final cause by grounding it in intelligibility and defining its causality as determination, not efficiency. Now, what about the formal cause? It faced its own kind of reductionist threat.
It did. If the final cause was threatened by seeming unreal or like a type of efficiency, the formal cause was often threatened because it looked too real, too much like an internal mechanism. People tended to reduce it to just the internal structure that explains how a thing physically operates, making it seem like just an internal efficient cause.
Like the form of a clock is just the arrangement of gears that makes it tick?
Yeah.
Which sounds like mechanical efficiency.
Exactly. So Timpler applies a similar strategy here as he did with the final cause. Isolate its unique, non-efficient role. He defines the formal cause as the intrinsic cause by which the formed effect is constituted.
The key word there being constituted. It's about being, not doing.
Precisely. And he makes another subtle but crucial distinction here, pushing back against a common scholastic definition. Many define form simply as that which informs matter.
Seems straightforward. The form gives shape or structure to the matter. What's wrong with that?
Timpler argues it misidentifies the primary relationship. For him, the form's main relatum isn't the matter alone, it's the composite, the formatum, the whole thing that results from form and matter combined.
Why does that matter?
Because if form just informed matter, it would seem like the form is giving the essence to the matter. But the matter retains its own nature. For example, the bronze remains bronze. Timpler insists the total essence of the thing, the statue, the plant, the animal, is constituted jointly by both form and matter. The resulting compound thing is ontologically distinct from just its form or just its matter.
So the form's primary job is to unite with matter to constitute the whole being.
Yes. It reinforces that form, like matter, operates purely in the mode of composition. This is why they were ranked as less perfect causes. Earlier, they need each other to do their causal work. They don't act independently.
And this ties the formal cause very closely to the final cause, doesn't it?
Extremely closely. You can almost think of them as two sides of the same coin, the essence. The final cause is the essence conceived as a possibility, a goal, in mente, in the mind. The formal cause is that same essence, actualized, structured, in rebus, in the thing.
Both are about the defining structure, the whatness of the thing. One is blueprint, one is actual structure.
Exactly. They are both fundamentally normative causes. They ground the effect in its essential definition.
Okay, but how does he stop the formal cause from collapsing into internal efficiency? When the composite thing acts, the dog barks because it has the form of a dog. The heart pumps because of its form. Isn't the form the direct cause of that action?
Timpler draws a very sharp line here. He says, yes, the operations of the composite, barking, pumping, are attributable to the composite subject, and that composite subject acts as an efficient cause because it possesses certain powers due to its form.
Yeah.
But crucially, the formal cause as such, its specific causal role, is purely constitution. It's the static principle of unity and structure that makes the thing what it is, thereby grounding the possibility of its operations. The form enables the efficient actions, but its own causality is just the act of constituting the essence with matter.
So the formal cause gives the dog the ability to bark, efficient potential, but the causality of the form itself is simply making the dog a dog, uniting its dogness with its matter. The explanation for being a dog is distinct from the explanation for the action of barking.
Precisely. He carves out a distinct explanatory space for constitution, keeping it separate from dynamic production or action. It's another way to preserve the integrity of the fourfold framework by showing that form does a unique job that efficiency cannot do.
Timpler's arguments are incredibly detailed, very rooted in scholastic debates. Yet somehow his ideas had a significant afterlife, didn't they? Especially filtering through his network in German Protestant thought.
They really did. You see his systematic approach and specific doctrines picked up and transmitted by figures like Goclenius, Martini, Alsted, Kalmbach. They form this kind of intellectual conduit, carrying these ideas forward.
And this conduit leads, maybe indirectly, but importantly, to a major figure bridging into the modern era, the German Cartesian Johann Clauberg.
Exactly. Clauberg comes along mid-17th century. He likely never read Timpler directly, or at least doesn't cite him, but he absolutely absorbed the intellectual atmosphere and the systematic tools forged by Timpler and that whole Scholasticism tradition.
And the clearest sign of that inheritance is in Clauberg's view of metaphysics itself.
Without a doubt, Clauberg's big work, his Onto Sophia, famously defines the object of metaphysics by identifying ens being directly with intelligibility, cogitabile, the intelligible or the thinkable.
Which is almost exactly Timpler's noetic shift we talked about earlier, moving away from Suárez's focus on concrete real being.
It's a direct conceptual echo. Timpler, along with Goclenius, really laid the groundwork for how modern ontology or metaphysica generalis, general metaphysics, would be conceived as the science of the thinkable, of being in general. They built the structure, you could say.
But then Clauberg takes that structure and fills it with Cartesian ideas, right?
Yeah.
And in doing so, he uses Timpler's own distinctions to arrive at a conclusion Timpler fought hard against.
That's the deep irony. Clauberg adopts Timpler's sharp distinction between extrinsic causes, production, and intrinsic causes, composition. He keeps the categories.
But then he reinterprets the intrinsic causes.
He radically reinterprets them. Building on Timpler's point that they are about composition, Clauberg basically says, well, if matter and form just compose the thing, then they're not really causes in the proper sense. They're just parts of a thing.
Parts, not causes. Why does that distinction matter so much?
Because Clauberg introduces a stricter criterion for being a proper cause. A true cause must be distinct from the effect it produces. It must actively give being or reality to it. Since matter and form are the effect, they constitute it, they aren't distinct from it in the right way, they're just components.
So, by labeling them parts instead of causes, he effectively sidelines them from the main discussion about causality.
Completely sidelines them. He relegates them to mere description or composition, not active causation, and with the intrinsic causes demoted.
That leaves only the extrinsic causes, efficient and final.
Right. And now Clauberg, heavily influenced by Cartesian mechanism and the idea of the world as matter in motion, res extensa, looks at the remaining two and makes the final decisive move. He concludes that while we might talk about final causes, properly speaking, to act, belongs only to the efficient cause. Propre tama agere. Soli competit efficienti causa.
Wow. So the efficient cause becomes the only true, universal, proper kind of cause left standing.
That's the end result. Timpler had carefully defined form and end by their non-efficient roles, constitution and determination. Clauberg takes that distinction and uses it to say, okay, if they're not efficient, they're not really causes at all. Only efficiency counts.
So Timpler's defense, by isolating their specific functions so clearly, paradoxically made it easier for Clauberg to just lop them off.
It seems that way. The rising tide of mechanism needed a way to deal with forms and ends. Timpler had put them in neat boxes labeled constitution and determination. Clauberg essentially looked at those boxes, saw they didn't contain dynamic action, and declared them irrelevant to true causation, leaving only the efficient cause, human or divine, as the driver of reality. Immanent forms just become geometric shapes. #outro.
So what we've really seen in this deep dive is this fascinating picture of Clemens Timpler, a truly systematic thinker fighting this incredibly detailed logical battle. He's trying to hold on to a richer, more intentional theological understanding of the world.
Yeah, battling against this rising mechanistic view that wanted to simplify everything down to just matter and motion.
His arguments really force you, even today, to think hard about what we mean by cause. Is it just about production, how things get made, the push and pull?
Or is there also a fundamental causality and determination in the definitions, the structures, the purposes that guide what gets made and why? Timpler was defending the why and the what with incredible logical rigor.
He definitely succeeded in giving the final cause a stronger ontological footing with his idea of possibilia and the intelligible.
Yeah.
And he drew that sharp line between the formal cause's constitution and the efficient cause's action. He built this logical fortress around teleology.
He absolutely did, but that leads us to the final, really provocative question his legacy leaves us with, doesn't it?
Go on.
Timpler worked so meticulously to clarify the distinct non-efficient roles of form and end-static constitution, normative determination. He isolated them to protect them. But in drawing those lines so sharply, separating them so cleanly from dynamic action, did he, perhaps ironically, make it easier for people like Clauberg, who were already leaning towards mechanism, to just say, okay, if that's all form and end do, then efficient action is the only kind of causation that truly acts, the only kind that really matters.
Did his defense, by limiting their scope, inadvertently pave the way for their exclusion when the philosophical gold standard shifted entirely to dynamic action?
It makes you